Behave, Carlo. Okay, we're live. Hey, Carlo, how are you doing?
Hey, Marcus, that's great.
Finally, we tracked you down. So you had some technical trouble, did you? What happened?
No, look, I don't know if it happens to you, but I think Zoom on my computer, maybe Zoom is getting tired because it's being used so much. So sometimes it crashes and then I need to restart my computer. And this happened really before our call. And so of course, restart, it takes a few minutes, but it's great to be connected. And again, I look forward to this conversation.
Good to see you again. For anyone who doesn't know you, just give us a little introduction to who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I suppose I have a couple of hats. I teach at MIT, where I direct a lab called Sensible City Lab. That's where we look at research about how technology is changing our interaction with the built environment. And I also run, I'm one of the co-founders of Carlo Ratti Associati. We got offices in New York, in Turin, and a small base in London, where we look at the same thing when it becomes design. Then maybe we could add that over the past few years, some of the ideas we developed both at the lab and the office have become startups. But it's kind of a different story. But if you want, it's the same vision, which is looked at through the lens of research, the lens of design, and then the lens of products when it becomes a startup.
Well, welcome to our daily screen time sessions with architects, sponsored by Enscape as part of Virtual Design Festival. And you talked about how a lot of your work looks at the impact of technology on architecture and the built environment. I guess this must be a particularly interesting time for you, right? This lockdown where we're all relying on technologies.
Yeah, totally. You might recall that Rahm Emanuel was the mayor of Chicago, was also the chief of staff of Barack Obama. Rahm Emanuel once said, never let a crisis go to waste. And so I think a crisis is a time when we can actually rethink what we do. Everything changes around ourselves, and we need to question many of the things that we are taking for granted before. So somehow, I think, especially architects, we are designers, engineers, and we're used to be creative in the way we respond to changing conditions. So I think this is really the time where we can actually help society in this process of readjustment. And
where are you at the moment? Are you in Cambridge, Massachusetts?
Yes, I'm stuck on my balcony in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I was here actually when COVID arrived, and so I'm quarantining here.
Okay, I think you put together a little presentation about your work. Do you want to share your screen now and talk us through that?
Totally. So I put together a few slides, and so here is my screen, and then I'll be very quick. But the first thing is about what I said before is Rahm Emanuel. You never want a serious crisis go to waste. And so it's what we were saying. Can we rethink some of the things we are doing? And so I want to share a couple of projects we've been doing over the past 4 to 6 weeks. We were asking this question across the team, and the team, as I said, it's in different continents. Also, some of the people are in Singapore. They've been living through the pandemic, through the different ways of the pandemic. So first, Italy was in lockdown, and then the US, and then Singapore that escaped the first wave became in lockdown. And so the first thing was a project we did as an open source project. We called it Cura. And we try to address the following question. The question is that, whatever happens, whatever we're going to do in the next 6, 12, or 18 months, hopefully we'll get a vaccine by then whatever happens, we will need more intensive care units. And, today, the way the people have been doing intensive care units is mostly to take a big convention center and turn it into a makeshift hospital. If you do it, however, one of the issues is that you get a lot of contamination of air. You cannot do biocontainment. Biocontainment is a very simple process whereby in hospitals, in proper hospitals, you got negative pressure. So the air only goes inside a hospital room. It doesn't go outside. And so any virus you might have cannot go outside in the environment. So you contain it inside. So that's what's called biocontainment with negative pressure. Because of this, because of the fact that in makeshift hospitals, you cannot do it, that's why we saw so many healthcare professionals who got sick both in China, then in Europe, and then in the United States. So our idea was, is there any quick way to do biocontainment, and also to have something we can easily move from one city to another city? Let me tell you what's happening in New York. In New York at the moment, some of the hospitals, like the hospital in Central Park, is being dismantled as we speak. And actually, but all of the equipment is not easy to mount somewhere else. Again, you need to mount all the medical equipment takes a long time. You need to have gases for patients. You need to have all of the ventilators, all the monitors. You need to have vacuum. So mounting that and dismantling takes a lot of time. So you cannot easily move it from, say, New York or New Orleans to another city. So our idea was, how can we do it in a different way, and how can we do it in open source? And the reason for open source is that really the virus is a piece of code, of genetic code that replicates and is attacking us. And the only way we can respond fast enough is if we develop code, in this case, design code, that many people can replicate in a distributed way. So that's why we decided, this should be an open source design. And so we thought, well, as we all know, there's one infrastructure which is pervasive, and that's containers. Containers are all over the world. We can move them very quickly. We use them. Everything we get in our kitchen, in our homes, every day comes one way or another, has been moved through containers. And so can we actually do a container that becomes a system with negative pressure, so we can do biocontainment, and also can be pre-assembled with all the medical things, so we can move it from one city to another city. And so that's what we started doing. And we started developing the drawings. We made it public. The amazing thing about open source was that the community grew very, very quickly. So now there's over 1,000 people who've been contributing to the drawings, have been replicating the drawings. There's different teams around the world actually building similar units. My favorite one is actually a team in Canada. And they used to develop containers, to build containers to grow cannabis. And actually they started converting that business into doing containers for intensive care units. And by the way, actually in Canada, there's a lot of need for intensive care units in the north. When you got all the population that live far north in Canada, and the hospital infrastructure, the healthcare infrastructure is not that pervasive. So I think Canada probably is a place where this could make a difference in a similar way as what's happening now in the global south, because the global south is approaching winter and sometimes doesn't have the same infrastructure we have in Europe or the United States. So here we also started building one unit. So you can see it here. This was being fabricated. This is mounted actually in the first unit. All of this was done in 4 to 6 weeks. So again, we would not have been able to do this unless we had kept a very open, way of working, open source way of working, sharing everything, allowing people to contribute in parallel. And so this is actually the first unit. Now there's 2 patients in it. It's part of a hospital in northern Italy. And again, is the first prototype in action. Here you see some of the inside with all the different elements. So for me, that was the little thing that was our response to that question. What can we do? A crisis means everything changes. And I think, Marcus, also what you're doing now, which is great, is a way to gather the design community together, to share ideas and so on. Probably would not have happened unless we had coronavirus. Somehow, you probably would have actually, probably like a couple of weeks ago, we might have been together in Milan at Milan Design Week that was canceled. And so we need to find new channels. So somehow it's something that, we should all be looking at. So this was just a very simple example. I'll tell you a couple of things a bit more generally about what we try to do with our architecture and our research. But I wanted to focus on this as really as a way of how we can look at the future. And, the definition of design I like most is a definition that was given by Herbert Simon, was a Nobel Prize winner. He wrote a beautiful book in the 20th century called The Science of the Artificial. And in The Science of the Artificial, Simon says, the natural sciences look at how the world is, but design looks at how the world could be. And so by looking at how the world could be, that's what we all do as architects, designers, also engineers, how things could be transformed. And I think that's particularly important now when the context, the environment is changing so fast, and we need to change the artificial world as a response in a very fast way. So somehow I think, this is the moment where our community can really contribute a lot and a lot of ideas in order to see how we manage the transition, and how then, maybe we can discuss this in a moment, how, what we will get back to. Are we going to see the same offices we saw before? We're working on a few projects. We're designing a space in London now for one of the main cafe brands. Are we going to see the main cafes as we knew before? What is going to change? I think, those things, I think all of us, our community, is well positioned to answer. Now, I don't know, Marcus, if you like me to stop here. I had another piece of a presentation that was more like they want to share with sorry, let me.
Yeah, carry on.
To share, yeah. So I wanted to share with something more as something else about, I think a lot of architects and designers these days are asking themselves, what could I do? Is it going to be difficult? I think, to be honest, I think that following virus, if it is right that we'll see a big recession or, even depression, life for many of us might be difficult. I think, the first thing that stops when you go to recession or depression is actually construction. Usually you got a lot of construction at the end of the economic cycle. Companies make money, and so on. At one point they want to build a new headquarters, or people want to build a new house. But I think at the beginning is, everybody's suffering, and so they will postpone such major investments like in buildings. And so I wanted to give this more as I was thinking about. I got a lot of questions from people around the world. I got a lot of questions from our students at MIT. Are very concerned. Some of them are graduating, are graduating now, and they are not going to find a position. They're going to find a job this summer. Actually, at MIT, we put together a bunch of new fellowship and scholarship for the summer, really to help people who normally would just go out in industry, but probably in this environment, in this economy, will have a lot of difficulties. And so I want to tell you a little story, and it's a little story of hope for many of the people who, yes, might be graduating, but have lost their job and are asking, what am I going to do? Especially, we don't know, hopefully not, but especially this, if the recession is going to be tough, as some people expect. And the story starts with this guy. So I think everybody who studied architecture know this guy. This guy is Luis Barragan. And Luis Barragan has an interesting story. Luis Barragan, as many of you know, won one of the first Pritzker prizes. But until when he was 50, he had done a lot of architecture production that was not really that great. He was actually over 50. He had done a few designs at the beginning in Guadalajara, where he was born. And then he moved to Mexico City, where he built a lot of kind of average architecture. However, he made a lot of money in kind of the big real estate boom of Mexico City in the 20th century. And then at one point, and by the way, here you see his office. It's in Calle Ramirez in Mexico City, the beautiful stairs that's over there, this kind of almost surrealist stair that has become one of the signs of landmarks of his production. So anyway, at one point when he was after 50, he wrote this in his diary. He said, I'm sick of listening to clients talking about their tastes. I'm quitting with all my clients. From now on, I'm going to work for one client only, myself. And I think a lot of architects and designers, we all have thought like this a few times in our lives. Now, Barragan was lucky. And he was lucky because he has spent a lot of time, as I mentioned, in Mexico City, building a lot of average architecture, but making a lot of money with it. So he was free. And because of that money, he was free. And after writing this, he only built a handful of homes. His own home in Calle Ramirez, a couple of homes at El Pedregal, a beautiful part of Mexico City, a convent, and so on. But just with a handful of homes, he kind of changed the course of architecture in the second half of the 20th century. Now, the little thing of hope I wanted to say is that for many of us, for many of the students who are graduating now, for many of the young architects and designers graduating now, you can be a little bit like Barragan without having to wait until when you're 50 or 60 like he did, and without having to make all that money at the beginning in order then to buy out your freedom. And the reason for that is the network, is the fact that today we can actually do the opposite. We don't need to go to a client. We can come up with an idea and then find clients later. And I want to tell you a very little story about a project we did. It's about, using the power of the network, crowdfunding and so on, in order to come up with an idea and coalesce a community. You don't start from a client, you start from a dream, and then, if the dream has merit, then things will come together and people will help you to make it a reality. So I want to tell you a very little story about a, a small project we did. In 2015, we did 2 pavilions at the World Expo in Milan. We are working now actually at the World Expo in Dubai. That has been just postponed today to 2021. But in 2015, we did 2 pavilions. One of the 2 pavilions was called the Future Food District. Now the 2 shoe boxes were given to us, but so the outside, we didn't have much control, but we could do everything we wanted inside. And so the people the organizer gave us the 2 boxes for just, they had built them. So they told us, it's your project. Maybe you can do another facade outside or something, change the architecture, but the box is there. And we didn't like the idea of wasting money just to do another facade outside of this very dull facade. And also we didn't like the idea that the organizers suggested at one point, which was actually to put LEDs on that. I think we're already spending too much time, especially now with coronavirus, in front of LED screens, our phone screens, our computer screens, our tablets, our TVs, and so on. And so we started thinking, can we show information and turn that in a cheap and quick way, that facade into something else. We looked at people. We wanted to talk about people at the expo from all over the world. We tried to look at, actually faces coming together. If you actually it's something beautiful if you take faces and profiles. If you combine them together, you tend to get to something very appealing to the human eye. Beauty seems to be like kind of a face that combines all of us. It's something very interesting that was discovered by the famous etologist in the 20th century called Abel Eibesfeld, one of Konrad Lorenz's students. Anyway, we wanted to do this. And so what we ended up doing was a big plotter. It's like just a robotic plotter that actually ended up at the World Expos. You always have these people from the Guinness record. This ended up being the biggest plotter ever made. And so you see it here, you see how it was working like a big robot. It was very cheap, but it became like a big attraction. I'll go very quickly through the video, but you can see how it was working, like a giant plotter drawing on the building. Now, I'll just very quickly to tell you the end of the story. So we also tested a smaller one in the office. This was it. We were testing it. People loved it to do selfies, with the plotter, just writing on a whiteboard in the office. And then we said, well, some people wanted to turn it into real products. So we put it online. I'll cut a long story short, but actually initially we said, okay, if you make $100,000, we can build a production line. It ended up last year being one of the biggest Kickstarter campaigns, one of the biggest ever globally. I mean, not huge, but like Kickstarter, but it was $3 million, so which was a significant amount of money to start the factory. And so you can see the video online. I will not go through it, but that actually, this was before the end of the campaign. But this actually led us then to do the factory to produce it. You see here actually the content which is now being developed. Actually, Olafur Eliasson was one of the first persons who helped us develop original content for the Real Robot. And you see now a community again of thousands of people around the world who use it in order to develop different content. Again, kind of in an open source way. So again, I want to tell you this little story more about, don't be concerned, and that's mostly for people who might have lost their job, might just graduated. Don't be concerned. I think, in the past you had to find a client, maybe fight with a client like Luis Barragan, in order to find something to do. But actually today there's something beautiful about this interconnected world we live in. You can change it. It's not client first and then do a design, but you can start with the design. I would say you can start with the dream, and then the dream, if it has merit, you will certainly coalesce a community of people who will help you make it a reality. So again, that was like kind of the little thing I want to say. And by the way, Scribit, which is now, I'm not showing you much, but it's much more, but there's really a factory in production and a good team of people working on it, is now also developing content for people's home. Like, the latest one, my favorite, was a Sudoku that people can do on their wall during the quarantine. So again, try to look at this time as a time also, as a crisis, as we said at the beginning, that shouldn't go to waste, can help us to rethink the way we do things.
Thanks, Carlo. It's interesting you mentioned that about just using this time to put ideas out there without waiting for a client, because we did interviews last week with Chris Precht and Dongping Wang, and both of them were talking about the same thing. This was a methodology they were using before the coronavirus crisis, but they were saying that both of them, they spend about half of their time just working on projects that they believe in, and then they put them out there, often on websites like Dezeen, and then some of them, of course, disappear, and some of them generate a momentum. So you think that you work the same way, and are you saying that now is a time where that approach is going to become even more important?
Yeah, I think it is. And you know, Marcus, there's something, sometimes one of the biggest mistakes that we sometimes do is we think that actually design is a response to a problem. And I think, you know, I think design is more like, you know, yes, it responds to the changing conditions we have around, but it's more what nature does. You know, what nature does is doing random mutations. And, you know, we don't do random mutation, but our designs is a bit similar to what, you know, natural evolution does, about trying something and see how it goes. So I think this is really the time we can experiment more and see what works, what doesn't work. It's actually very good if something doesn't work, because then we can learn from it. And actually sometimes, let me add something else. By the way, all of this, if anybody is interested, you know, all of this is a bit related to the framework of speculative design that, you know, Tony Dunn and Fiona Raby developed at the Royal College of Art probably 10 years ago. But, you know, we can use design again to look at different ways to change the world we live in and build together the future. And sometimes it's also good, as I was saying, if we explore futures that we don't like, because then as society we can generate antibodies. Actually, Marcus, I still remember the first time when you and I met. And it was at the Venice Biennale back in 2006. And you were editor-in-chief at Icon, if I'm not wrong. And we had a conversation. At the time we did, for the first time, we looked at real-time data in the city of Rome collected from cell phone. That had never been done, which is what's happening today because of coronavirus. I don't know if you remember that, but basically we collected all this data in real time from Rome and showed it in order to see the city as a living organism. Which is actually, by the way, I haven't talked too much about our approach to architecture, but it's really about how can we reconcile the artificial and the natural world. Anyway, going back to that, you know, in that time when we did it, which is actually what's happening today with tracing apps and so on. But when we did it for the first time, we knew that that was a future that was very interesting, but also dystopian. But still, we wanted to show it in a public venue at the Venice Biennale to start a conversation. So to me, design is a way, again, not only there's never one solution, it's more like a way we can try something. Many times we fail, but it's important that we start feedback in the conversation. That to me is the essence of design.
I do remember that conversation in 2006 very well. I remember seeing the project, and it was, you'd modeled cell phone use of people coming out of football stadiums and things like that, right? So you had this big swarm of people. That was part of it.
Well, actually what we did, and the interesting thing is that at the time this hadn't yet been done, is I said, you know, now is what you see if you open your Google Transit, you see if there's a traffic jam here and there. So what we did was we got real-time feeds from the city of Rome to MIT. Then we used artificial intelligence and data visualization to analyze it, and we sent it back to the Venice Biennale. Now, the interesting thing is that we had many things there. We had taxis in real time, we had traffic jams, congestion, and so on. But everybody still remembers one thing, because, and I think that's what you mentioned, we had one slide, and that slide was a very particular moment we captured that summer. That was a special summer. 2006 was when Italy won the soccer World Cup. And actually we looked at how the city responded to that giant shock. Somehow almost like, you know, coronavirus, you change the boundary condition. Well, Italy wins the soccer World Cup, and you see all of Rome, you know, first everybody's silent, nobody moving anymore. And then everybody going berserk, you know, celebrating and going to the citizens. So I think it's funny you remember that the thing that most people seem to be captivated by that thing, which was actually one specific instant of that summer 2006. But more generally was about how we can use data to make the world of the artificial more similar to the world of the natural. So our work, and I'm saying this a bit more for people who might not be too familiar, is about our work takes, you know, try to work at the boundary between natural and artificial, thinking that the future of evolution is more like co-evolution of this kind of natural and artificial. And that happens in two ways. One way is technology can make a building or a city behave like a living organism. in what we were saying about cell phone data allows us to look at, you know, a place like if it were alive, something we couldn't do just 10 or 20 years ago. In the same time, it's really nature that can come back into our cities. So real nature, you know, trees and nature in general, and the ecological diversity can come back into our cities. So that's still the same thing we're trying to explore.
And actually, that trip to Venice in 2006 was important to me in other ways, because it was when I first discovered blogging. And then it was also my last trip with Icon, because then I lost my job shortly afterwards and then started Dezeen. So actually, you were there right at the beginning.
I remember it, because I don't know if you remember this. I but I remember we met there, and then I think the following year we met with Oliviero Toscani in Dubai, on a beach in Dubai. Remember, it was this kind of World Design Forum, and we ended up there talking about the future of design. And so, of course, you know, that was before the crisis. Everything collapsed after that. I mean, there's some kind of recursive pattern, Marcus. You know, every time I meet you, after that, you know, there's a, well, you lose your job, and then after that it was the 2008 crisis, or now it's the pandemic. But I remember you were just starting Dezeen. I think what you've done is incredible, and it's again, you know, probably would not have done it without the crisis, which, you know, the different crisis, you know, about you know, the environment changing and having to rethink what's a new channel you could use. And certainly, you know, your impact today is orders of magnitude bigger. Dezeen's impact is orders of magnitude bigger than any printed news magazine.
You were talking about, you're having conversations now with clients about talking about the shock of this situation, conversations about, will we be using the same offices in the future? Will we be using the same type of cafes in the future? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? How will those specific types of space survive? Will they survive?
Look, it's a very good question. I think we are faced with two scenarios. One scenario I wouldn't discuss. I think there is a chance this might happen, but it's a very small chance that I don't really think is, you know, it's certainly not the most probable scenario. That is, you know, if we do not get a vaccine, the transition might last quite a long time. But, you know, if you look at the past, you know, I want to start with this just because I would like to take it out of the way. You know, yes, you know, what is the worst case scenario? And again, you know, we want to wish for the best, but plan for the worst. So the worst case scenario would be we don't find a vaccine. And actually, this virus, a bit like dengue, is one of those viruses that, you know, you get it the first time, you're fine. The second time you get it is even worse than the first time. Now, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think I've been talking to a lot of friends who are doctors. In doing Cura, we've been working closely with the World Health Organization and other global organizations. So I don't think that is the case, but there's a minor risk. If that is the case, really, we might need bigger change in our social systems and the way we organize cities. But honestly, you know, the thing is that cities have seen so many pandemics. Think about Venice. We were talking before about Venice. Venice in the 14th century lost 60% of its population because of the Black Death, because of the plague. And still, you know, we keep on living in Venice. We keep on adoring its little streets, its Campi and Calle, you know, and Venice, that was in the 14th century. But, you know, just 100 years ago, Thomas Rand wrote Death in Venice. It was about the cholera epidemic in Venice. So I think cities have seen much worse conditions. So that's just to start to say, I think basically that I don't know if it is going to be 6, 12, 18 or 24 months, but, you know, we'll go back to normal. Basically, normal means, you know, we don't need to care about, you know, we can kiss people, we can, you know, meet people, we don't need to wear masks necessarily, and so on. Now, under those conditions, however, it doesn't mean that everything goes back to normal. So on the office side, we're actually working on this. We're doing the headquarter of a financial institution, and, you know, we had just finished design development, and they came back to us and say, well, how should we change it? Because of coronavirus. Now, let me tell you what I think. And, you know, again, it's a guess. And as we were saying before, design is about, you know, trying something. And maybe I'm totally wrong. So I don't want really to do this as a prediction. More, I think what I would try today. My impression is that if we see a bit of crisis, and then we see that now CEOs are comfortable with people doing remote working and smart working, that, you know, we could downsize a bit the physical space. So, you know, I was surprised that some of the big CEOs over the past few weeks were saying that, you know, they had discovered that, you know, people work also from home. It's like, you know, they discover smart working, like, you know, just with a 20-year delay. So because of this, I think people will be more flexible. And it means, maybe if you go to Barcelona, you don't need to go for a weekend. You could actually spend the week in Barcelona and keep on working from there. Or, your weekend, if you go to the countryside, maybe you spend Monday and Tuesday in the countryside, you keep on working and you go back to the city on Wednesday. So if that were to happen, I think we'll have kind of two consequences. One is that we might need much less overall office space. So the amount of square meter per person could go down. And that could also be pushed by the crisis. If companies want to save money. I mean, we're seeing our office in New York, we're doing the same. We've been cutting down on physical space, and we're looking at what to do next. Well, maybe we are smaller, and people do things more dynamically. And at the same time, you want that when you meet in person, you maximize the value of meeting in person. And I think, what do you think? I'll ask you a question, Marcus, so we do it more interactive. What do you think are the things that you cannot really fully replicate with Zoom, Skype, and so on? What are those? Of course, there's physical context. Let's leave aside, physical interaction, sex, and so on. We know that, but that doesn't need to be part of the office experience. Sometimes it is, but it doesn't need to be part of the office experience. The question is, what are those things that we cannot yet replicate digitally? I think there's a few. What do you think?
The accidental chance discovery, or overhearing someone's conversation, or walking past someone's desk and seeing a note or a book, that's really, I think that we've learned that that's really important, that people are working in pockets and not accidentally sharing stuff. Controlled sharing, yes, can still happen on Zoom and email groups and stuff like that, but it's the accidental sharing, that when you walk past someone and on their screen there's something and you go, oh, that's exactly the thing I was looking for, or someone else mentioned that yesterday. So the randomness factor.
Exactly. I agree 100%. I think there's a few other points, but I agree with this 100%. Maybe if we had met in London where you are now, like half an hour ago, I might have seen the book you were reading. We might have started a conversation, or I might have found something else that might have changed totally my life. And this hasn't happened in here. It's great conversation, but actually it's curated. So I would say the randomness. Somehow, we could just say serendipity is finding what we are not looking for. I think, every time we meet for a meeting, we meet on Zoom or Skype and so on, we kind of are curated and we know what you're going to discuss. I mean, that kind of casual encounters are not happening. And so I think the way I see this is that we might have slightly smaller offices, but where we design them in a different way to enhance that ability for casual encounters. And we know what we are doing this with this headquarters. That's what we are doing. We're starting to incorporate this in the design, because I believe to a certain extent, we can engineer a bit of serendipity. And you engineering again it doesn't matter, certainly if you work in a cubicle, you can work from home. But actually, if you have more the interaction you have when you're going to a small talk, you're eating together, you're having aperitivo like people do in Italy. Our team in Milan and Turin spends a lot of time in the evening having aperitivo together. That's it's not just fun. It's actually really what you were saying, the serendipity. And I think somehow, I think serendipity will be one of the key focuses for all of us as designers, architects, engineers after the pandemic.
A lot of people are starting to question land use in the city as well. We've noticed during the pandemic how much space cars take up, how hard it is for us to go and get our exercise safely. What do you think about the lessons for cities, and do you think they will take those lessons?
I certainly think that the system we know, which is actually a system from the 20th century, is non-sustainable. And let me tell you, the average usage time for a car today, it's 4%. So we use a car 4% of the time, 96% of the time. Not only we don't use it, but actually it uses valuable space in our cities. And then the other thing is that when we use it, sometimes it's an SUV. Here in the United States, I got rid of my car like a few years ago. We still have some company cars, but I don't have a personal car anymore. But in the United States, most people have an SUV. It's like a giant piece of metal. It's tons of steels. You need to move around using a huge amount of space in the city to move what? Like one person, 75 kilos? Doesn't make any sense. And if you multiply the efficiency of the two, got a 5-seater or a 7-seater, you got one or two person inside and you use it 4% of the time. We have a huge infrastructure. We built our cities around a huge infrastructure with an efficiency of what? 2%. So I think 1 or 2%. So I think certainly we can change it. And I think this might actually accelerate the change. I think the coronavirus might accelerate the change. What are some of the things? One thing that's I think is very exciting is micromobility, electric scooters, electric bikes. That's what another startup that came out of our lab I'm still involved with is called Super Pedestrian, is one of the main players here with micromobility. So how we can micromobility, again, why in New York, when most of the trips are less than 2 miles, just an electric scooter is perfect or a bike is perfect. So I think, using more micromobility is going to be important. Self-driving is going to help as well, because self-driving can help sharing better, both ride sharing and car sharing. The car can give you a lift and then can give a lift to somebody else. It doesn't need to be parked. So self-driving, which is coming, can help a lot as well. So I think we're going to see a lot of changes in mobility, and I think that's good news for our cities. Certainly, the 20th century system was not sustainable. And by the way, in a project which is under construction now, which is a skyscraper in Singapore, it's a competition we did together with with Bjarke, and we won a couple of years ago. Now it's under construction. What we did there was actually all of the parking spaces. We already planned for a future when they might not be needed. So still we had to build them today, because today you need them. But then we built flexibility in the architecture so we could actually make this compatible with different future scenarios. I think that's very important. It's the same thing we're doing now in a road project in Melbourne. Again, we're trying to see how this infrastructure can be transformed into something else. We don't know what the future will be exactly, but at least we can look at these kind of cones of possibilities, and design can help us make sure that that we fit inside it. Also, the last week, and again, I want to say this: if some people are interested in having a look, you can also, if somebody wants to, you can download also the work for Sunnyside, the big development in New York, where we've been helping with the master plan. And there as well, we've been trying to think about this, how mobility could change, and how can we build an infrastructure and new standards that are compatible with different futures.
Back to your Cura project, the kind of pop-up hospital projects. There's a lot of people think that shipping containers are not good for any kind of architectural uses. And we knew we'd get some comments about that, and sure enough we have. But what's your take on shipping containers then? How can you put a sick person in a metal box?
No, look, I think they're going to work for the points I was saying before. I think, the fact you can build all the medical equipment can be built inside. It can be fabricated like a washing machine if you want. It can be easily moved from one place to another. So, it can use an infrastructure that moves things around the planet already. So I think it's almost like ideally suited for this. But I totally understand your smirk. The smirk was actually the same I got in the office. The idea of shipping container is, people think, this is another student project, architecture, second year architecture student project. But, I think perhaps the only thing that taught me is that, even the most trite solution can sometimes also be the right one. So you shouldn't be limited by the fact that, I totally agree with you. I wouldn't, if you'd asked me like last year, would I ever do a container project in my life, an architecture design project with containers? I would say no. But in this case, it makes sense because it's the only really easy way you can actually, if we had done Central Park in Manhattan with containers, there were discussions with the mayor's office a few weeks ago, or one of the other hospitals there. Now those containers could be shipped to some of the other cities, which now are really battlegrounds for the pandemic. While at the moment, yes, you can reuse the ventilators, but to mount it, to package it, to send it, and so on is much more difficult. So somehow, I would say perhaps what it taught me is that I totally agree with you. This is probably a tried solution I would normally not have looked at, but in this case, it makes sense. And so we shouldn't be limited by prejudice either way.
No, it wasn't the Dezeen team that were smirking. It was our readers, because there's obviously a lot of people who see that shipping containers are seen as the solution to where people live, where people work. There's all these empty boxes sitting around looking for a use. But what you were actually saying earlier on was that actually they're a very sensible solution, whereas these big, the switching of function for convention centers, for example, in hospitals, is not very effective because you can't biocontain the patient, right? That's what you're saying. And also the Nightingale Hospital in London, for example, which was, opened after 10 days, converting a convention center into it's not even a hospital, it's a place where people can recover. it hasn't been used, and maybe that was part of the problem as well, that you can't isolate people.
You're totally right. Yes, the two key things that you cannot do biocontainment, you cannot do negative pressures. To do negative pressure in the box. And then the other thing, if you want to move things from a city to another city, as I said, Milan has a lot of spare capacity, but now parts of the UK would benefit from more capacity. It would be so easy to move already built units where you got your bed, you got the monitor, you got the medical equipment. What we learned in this project, we've been working a bit with medical. By the way, I think redesigning the interface with medical system is going to be very, very important. Like in the hospital, I think we got two kind of dinosaurs in society today. Hospitals for sure. This kind of centralized machine where you go and usually you get sicker than when you get in. You get out sicker than when you got in. And the other dinosaurs are universities. And I'm telling you this, as someone who's been involved with universities all my life. But I think we need to reinvent the university system. So anyway, I think rethinking healthcare is going to be very important as we look at the future. And what we discovered with this project is that there's a lot of complexity, and being able, if you just, it's not easy to if everything is mounted in the same physical structure, it's much easier to move it than if you need to take things apart, put them in boxes, ship them somewhere else and mount it. It takes much longer, and the risk of failure is much higher.
Whilst you were talking there, I was trying to find a story that I wrote a couple of weeks ago. Here it is, yeah. Hospitals desperately need designers to improve everything from the way they tackle coronavirus to the layout of operating theatres, design of medical charts, according to a senior US doctor. He said that this pandemic has really thrown up the fact that engineers design these, big corporations produce all the equipment that's used in hospitals without thinking about the patient, without thinking about the doctors, without thinking about how to get all this stuff in the room even.
Yeah, totally. Totally. And the beautiful thing again about what we saw in other, again, this is what we're seeing here is you've been in an industry probably that 10 years ago was the first industry to be disrupted by digital. And so that, people could get access to information in a distributed way without having to go through some physical distribution nodes or the magazine or newspaper. And the same disruption we've seen in many other spaces, if you think about Amazon with e-commerce. And I think we're now seeing in healthcare. So, I think rethinking a house that's much healthier, where not everything. Of course, your house will never be an OR, but it can do, or an ER, but it can do a lot of the exams that you do in a lab. It can really help you to monitor your health. We're actually, we're starting a project with the Technogym right now. It's about health and also monitoring, people's. It's about wellness and health together. So somehow, again, because of network, you can distribute things. And by the way, also think about doctors. Traditionally, you will always go and see your doctor. Now, hospitals in Boston are doing all of their, doctors are seeing patients via Zoom. Again, that this thing has pushed a big change that otherwise might have taken much longer. And I think that then, you don't need all the space in the hospital. You can do things in a much more distributed way.
Yeah, Dongping Wong was showing a project for a more distributed healthcare system where empty retail units in neighborhoods could be given over to some of the function that hospitals would normally do. So they're much nearer the person that needs them as well.
Totally. Yeah.
But you also said that there were two dinosaurs. One was healthcare and the other one was universities. So what's the problem with universities?
Well, believe it or not, we still have universities like they were with the model that was initially designed in Bologna in Italy in the year 1000, and then was perfected in Oxbridge, in Oxford and Cambridge, and in other places around the world. And again, is a model which is based on a physical concentration of accumulation of knowledge and physical exchange. Now, a lot of these things can be done digitally. Now, 3 years ago, everybody thought, well, the university is dead, let's have MOOCs. And I think that was a bit naive. It was the idea that, everything is going to be digital. It's not the case. But I think, we need to find a new model, which is in between digital and physical. And by the way, MIT, we shut down the campus a couple of months ago. Next fall, I think there's still discussions, but in many, I believe Harvard decided they're not going to open up. Some universities are opening up. We're still discussing. So I think, about the fall semester, we'll see what happens. But this has forced a lot of people to fully embrace digital. And you know what? It can even be better to give feedback to student to interact and to have exchanges. So what I imagine is actually, and, you know, I think, again, if I had to redesign a university, I would use a model which is more similar to the system that my colleague Neil Gershenfield has been developing with Fab Labs, or has been promoting the Fab Labs with different nodes and different people coming together, but it's both combining. It's not totally digital, it's not totally physical, it's actually digital information plus physical hubs. And almost like a hierarchical system where you can actually aggregate and share information in different ways at different nodes. But there's no doubt for me that the system we have at the moment, and the reason I'm saying a dinosaur, is that it's too expensive. You know, especially in the United States, it's too expensive, and, you know, we cannot continue this way. And I believe we can find a better way to get, maybe not 100%, by 95% of what an amazing Ivy League education is today, but for 10% of the cost.
And what would this mean for your life then, Carlo? You wouldn't need to be in Cambridge, Massachusetts, would you, if MIT became like a
semi-virtual
institution?
Well, you know,
anyway?
You know, but as I said, well, first of all, before the pandemic, I'm also the way that, you know, before the pandemic, I was never spending more than 3 or 4 days in the same place, and I was traveling a lot, and I was finding that very enriching. You know, both traveling between the bases we have, you know, in Boston, New York, and Italy and Singapore, and also with you know, meeting other people and moving around the world, some kind of following projects, almost like, you know, I like the idea almost being a doctor following patients, you know, care following projects or cities, and helping cities and you know, new construction to helping to imagine new construction, almost to mend and fix urban fabric. So that was my life before, and I'm also asking myself, you know, will I really want to go back to that model? I don't know. Now, going back to what you're saying, still, you know, when I'm thinking about the university, I would say not totally digital. Still, we need physical spaces. I think there's something magic about campuses. You know, the campus here in Cambridge, about, you know, many places we know in city campuses, or in general about districts, and it can be with different type of vocation, university, academic vocation, and think about parts of New York we love because of that very particular mix of people. So going back to your point, serendipity will still need us to create this kind of places where we can come up with new ideas we were not expecting, we're not looking for. But yes, maybe not all of us, with all the students and all the professors, maybe we'll not need to be all of us at the same time in Cambridge. Maybe we'll be able to share knowledge in a different way.
And final question, not that I'm not sure whether this is an area you feel qualified to talk about, but you talked about healthcare being a dinosaur, universities, physical universities being a dinosaur. What about air travel? Because there you are, you're with all these other human beings sharing a ventilation system. What's the future of air travel? It's like it's a potential coronavirus sharing zone, isn't it?
Look, I think, you know, again, we said before, there's two options. One option, but I don't think it's going to be the case, is that, you know, this pandemic is going to last for the long term and we don't find a vaccine, but most likely in a year we'll have a vaccine. And then I think things could resume like before. Now, the fact that things could resume like before doesn't mean that they will resume like before. I don't think so. You know, I've seen so much wasted travel in the past few years, and people were flying. Myself, I mean, sometimes doing this, it's crazy when you think about the environment, you know, or people flying, you know, just for a few hours from one continent to another one to attend a meeting or to sign a contract. You know, now we know we can do that. We're all much more comfortable with doing that digitally. So I think we'll do a bit less of it, just if nothing else, because of, you know, what's happening with the planet. By the way, while we can electrify a lot of mobility systems on the ground, it's still difficult in the air. And the reason is that the energy density you have in kerosene with gas is much higher than what you have with batteries. So I think, you know, there's a lot of work in looking at biofuel but somehow, you know, because of the planet, I think there's two reasons why. So what I want to say is that I think we'll fly again, and we want to fly again because we want to meet each other, because we want to shake hands, we want to make love, we want to, you know, physical contact is still going to be important, you know, and then we're human. And so we will want to do it. But maybe we'll do it with a bit less frequency. By the way, I'll tell you something that we haven't published yet, but a bit of work that we are doing at the lab it's a bit of mathematical work. We got quite a few mathematicians at the lab, and we basically, most responses to coronavirus has been limiting people mobility in terms of distance. You cannot go internationally, or in Italy, you can move only at the city block scale. In Spain, the same. If you go jogging, you cannot go further away than 500 meters. So the type of bounding mobility in terms of distance. Now, there's something else that has a very strong impact, the same as distance, but it's actually frequency. So somehow the two are interchangeable. And there's a paper we're doing on that we're quite excited about the results. So I think that's another way to look at it. So what I imagine is that we'll go back to flying, but the frequency might change a little bit. And by changing the frequency, we might also make things more sustainable for the planet and also for tourism. There's no doubt that tourism, as we knew it, think about Europe, it's beautiful, that if you're a kid in Europe, you can do every weekend in Barcelona, in Prague, in London, and so on. But it's also not sustainable for the citizens. People are fighting back. In Barcelona, people are starting to throw stones at tourists, or before the pandemic, we're starting, to attack tourist buses. And, the Catalan temper has brought in, but the same is in Venice and so on. You're killing the social fabric of the city. And so if we change frequency, we can actually also find a more sustainable way to do tourism. Maybe we don't need, because of remote working and remote learning, we can still go to Barcelona, but not for like 24 hours. Maybe we spend, or to Turin or to Milan, maybe we spend like, a week or 2 weeks and we stay there and then we go back. So I think changing the frequency has the same impact on the spread of diseases, and the same impact in terms of sustainability, and sustainability, both ecological and in terms of tourist sustainability, as changing the travel we do. So the distance travel is the same, distance and frequency go together. So what I would imagine is perhaps we'll go back to travel, but perhaps the frequency will be a bit less.
So just to clarify, the research you're doing has established that you said that distance and frequency are interchangeable. So going 10 kilometers from your house once is the same as going 5 kilometers twice. It has the same potential for spreading.
Exactly. It has exactly the same potential. And, we're still looking at this in more detail. But basically what you do, you get, again, big mobility data sets, like the one you get from cell phone data, like the one we were talking about before from the Biennale in Rome, but now they're very common. So you get those, you capture all the mobility, and then you apply one of the contagion model. They're called SI model. SI models are applied on networks. So this is all very basic network science. And you see, how contagion is progressing. And then what you can do, imagine you take London, you take all the mobility of Londoners before the coronavirus crisis. And then you can ask yourself, what is going to happen in terms of contagion if I restrict mobility in terms of distance and tell people cannot travel more than 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, whatever. And what is going to happen if I change the frequency? And you find that interchangeable exactly as you say. So basically that moving 1 mile once a day is like moving once a week for 10 miles. Every 10 days for 10 miles, yeah.
And that's data that already exists, is it?
We're quite excited about this. Again, we haven't published yet. We're still finalizing, but it's based on a lot of data we have at the lab, and it's based on on the real situation. So if that is the case, this can help us also understand something that people haven't been looking at yet, which is how to reopen tourism. So we've been looking at how to reopen hair salons and so on, but nobody's been discussing how we're going to go back to travel for holidays and so on outside of the country. And so this kind of dependency between distance and frequency could actually help. You might want to say, for a while, you will not be able to do 1 weekend in every European capital, but if you want, you could go for 3 weeks to another place on the continent.
Okay, Carlo, thank you so much for your time. I could carry on talking to you for hours, but
Marco, it's always a great conversation. By the way, is there any comment or anything, any question that people have asked, anything we want to mention to have a bit of feedback loop with them?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Greg asks, is urban mobility and cars not another 20th century dinosaur? Should we not
No, I think you're totally right. I think, self-driving cars is going to help, but I see much more potential in new mobility systems and in something we call the moving web, which is, when all of the systems are interchangeable. Think about something like Kayak or Expedia with the mobility options. That doesn't happen yet. But if you think about that, it's more like, how we can combine cycling, walking, everything else together. I think I agree with you.
Okay, and we don't have any time for any more questions, I'm afraid, Carlo. But it's so great to speak to you. Let's catch up again soon and let us know when this latest research is published.
Anyway, thanks. I love the conversation. And, again, for the people listening, think of this as an opportunity. I think, first of all, we'll get out of this and hopefully we'll get out stronger.
Great. See you soon.